Hello, everybody. I'm super excited for our conversation today about the film Represent, which is now playing virtually at Gorton Community Center, available at gortoncenter.org/film. And I'm so thrilled to welcome director, cinematographer, and editor of Represent, Hillary Bachelder, for a conversation about her film. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you. I'm glad to
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah, it's so great. And I am just like so excited to dive into this film and your experience making it and how relevant it is in 2020. And my first question is, you've been working in the film community in Chicago for quite some time, including at Cartemquin. And so, you're a storyteller, you're no stranger to storytelling. So can you tell us a little bit about the story of Represent and how it found you and how you found it?
I like the way that you put that. Um, yeah, I kind of say that the seeds little germinated started on election day 2016 when I had a moment when I went to go vote. My very auspicious, elementary school cafeteria polling place or whatever, and I walked in, I looked at the ballot, and I just saw Hillary on the ballot. Obviously I knew her name was Hillary before I walked in on that day, but on that day I walked in and I was like, my name is on the ballot. That's so meaningful. And I just started sobbing, and it's super embarrassing and yada yada.
I cried election day too. I totally get it.
I mean, obviously I'm that kind of person, right? Clearly I'm that kind of person who's gonna cry when she votes anyways. But I walked out that day, and it just was the sort of ongoing impact of what that representation meant really stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And of course, after the 2016 election, there was so much sort of general unpacking of thoughts and feelings that people were doing, especially kind of on the progressive left. And I knew that I had this question around, what does representation mean in our democracy? And then there was all of this momentum kind of even leading into the Women's March, early 2017, where you saw that all of these women who were kind of hadn't been as politically engaged prior to this moment were saying yes, I want to do something. And yes, that might mean running for office. And I have no idea what that means. I was I don't really know what that means either. And so I started going to trainings and joining all the Facebook groups and kind of reaching out to people. And I started kind of doing pre-interviews with women who were thinking about running, and just fell in love with so many of those women. I was oh my God, this woman's a school teacher in Wisconsin who's going to run against a former student of hers. This woman lives in a grain cell in Iowa and is going to run for state representative. And, and so I just was this is all so exciting, and it felt very necessary to kind of immerse myself in when I was feeling pretty pessimistic politically myself. So I was I need to be around the badass women who are going out and making the change right now.
Yeah.
And so partially it was my own kind of political therapy to be around that. And then partially I was just oh, this is a story of a moment and of a movement, but it also, we try and do this in the beginning of the film where we kind of set up this little historical montage. It's it's the year of the woman, it's the year of the woman, it's the year of the woman. You hear it from Walter Cronkite first, and then all the way up through 2018. And it's okay, that's a nice little trope that we have, but it's clearly not represented. We haven't, it hasn't been the year of the woman, because women are still vastly underrepresented in our political system. So what does it mean? We wanted the film to also, this story to also be one that stands outside of a particular election year and kind of speak to this universal experience of women in a political space, women in a public space, and trying to make that change in your community.
Yeah.
It's a very long-winded way to answer.
No, it's great. And I love that you traveled around and did this sort of goodwill tour to figure out these stories as they were emerging. And I imagine you probably could have made a 90-hour film with all those stories.
I desperately wanted to make a series.
Yeah. I mean, and those, all those people who were just sort of felt passionate and felt a call to act, but figuring out, navigating that call is really fascinating. And we keep seeing that happening. And I'm curious, as you were going around and meeting people, how did you land on your three subjects, on Maya, Bryn, and Julie?
I ended up finding Maya first. She really was one of the first people that I talked to for the whole project, because she announced she was going to run for mayor really in early 2017, and made some news, some headlines when she did so, because she was 22 at the time. And so I was sitting in Chicago and I had my like little Google alert for like women in politics set. So Maya Jones pops up in my inbox. I was like, this is someone I need to meet. And so it was pretty clear once I did meet her that I was like, oh, this, yes, like just yes, all around. And after that, you know, I had some ideas going into it that I was like, well, I want women of different economic backgrounds, for, you know, different racial identities, different sort of income levels, different communities, both politically and sort of the urban to suburban to rural divide. We have stories that span all of that. So I was sort of looking in these like different buckets, but there's also some amount of just like, you have to meet people and it has to feel right. And for me, I was like starting this project with no money whatsoever. So I was like, I'm not getting paid to like spend a lot of time with these women. So they have to be people that like I like and want to spend all of my time with. And so there are some of those kind of in undefinable, you know, characteristics that you just meet people and you're like, oh, I relate to you. I think, you know, you're sort of great on camera and you represent sort of a different demographic, a different type of story that I think it's important to get at. Like, I definitely was looking intentionally for someone who had kids. We ended up with two of our candidates did have kids from different age ranges, which I thought was interesting as well. But that was just something when I was like going to those trainings that like I heard over and over again was all of these women who were like, yeah, I think I'm going to run, but I'm a little nervous. I think I'll run later on when my kids are older.
Oh, yeah.
And I heard that again and again. And I was like, how old are your kids? And then I'd hear like, they're 2, they're 4, they're 6, they're 8, they're 10. And I was like, universally, women were like, maybe when my kids are older, I'll do it. And so it was really, you know, I wanted to have some women on screen who are going to like be toting their kids, whether they are, you know, Britain's kids were like 2 and 4 when we started filming, and Julie's were like 5, 10, and 13 or something. You know, it's like you really can bring them all with you. But yeah, and then we were kind of looking for, like I said, the different types of communities. We obviously followed women across the different political spectrums. So it was a lot of sort of trial and error and feeling out like, how are these stories going to complement one another when we bring them all together on screen?
Yeah. And did you set out to make sure to include people, subjects on both sides of the political aisle? Like, was that sort of the plan, or was it that the characters sort of emerged and they happened to fall in different political parties?
It was like a little bit of both. It was my intention originally. And then when we were filming, so both Maya and Bryn had elections initially in 2017. And so I started filming with them first. And when I was filming with Bryn, I also filmed with the woman that she runs against, one of the 2 trustees she's sort of running against, Melanie, who is a Republican and was the incumbent trustee. And she sort of turned into like a secondary character in that storyline. I thought she was really strong and like very, you know, I think she comes across very sympathetically on screen, and she complicates Bryn's story in a way that I was like, oh, you know, after filming with them for a while, I was like, maybe I don't need a third full candidate. Maybe this is kind of the whole package. But then as I kept going, I was kind of like, no, you know, I think Melanie is not, we're not going to be able to give her really enough screen time to like fully stand in for all Republican women. It's a lot to ask. So we like started looking again kind of at the end of 2017 and into 2018 and found Julie.
Yeah. And did you, I mean, you know, as you're going around and meeting people and having that moment where you sort of click with them, you know, the access that you get and like the trust that these subjects have, like there's a comfort level that makes it feel like nothing ever feels inorganic, you know, it just feels super authentic. So was that just sort of like magic kismet, or did you like go to dinner with them and like hang out and like, you know, kind of like did you pitch yourself, you know, to like get them to be like, this woman's on the level, like this is good, I can welcome her into my home and my life and my career?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. Like I tried to, this is my first feature film, so it's hard to stand behind a body of work and say, this is how I make films. I had like a short that I could share with them. And then I had some other films that I'd been involved with at Cartemquin. And so I tried to do that up front and say, like, here's some links to the films that are the type of films that I'm involved with, the type of films I want to make, and sort of represent the level of access that like I need from you. I don't know if any of them actually watched any of those links. Because it really, I mean, it really just becomes about like, okay, you have to keep showing up and spending time and putting the camera down and hanging out and like being respectful. Like I tried to set up front too. I was like, it's my job to be a little bit pushy. Like I'm supposed to be there when you're sick of me being there and still pointing a camera in your face. So I just know that that's like the foot I'm going to put forward, but you always have the right to like ask me to turn the camera off, and I will always respect that. Tell me when you need space. Tell me when, you know, this isn't something that you need represented for whatever reason. And so I think there were only like sort of a few times that happened, but I think you build trust in part by just like being true to your promises. Actually turning it off when they ask you to turn it off, and not trying to get away with like just a little bit more or whatever.
Right.
And it was like I spent 3 full years with Maya and Bryn and 2 years with Julie. And so it's like, you keep showing up and people get used to you.
Yeah. Are you still in touch with all of them?
Yeah. I mean, partially it's like the film is still rolling out. And so we have a podcast on Monday and we're all doing things around that. I got a video that actually broke my heart a little bit from Bryn's oldest daughter, Emlyn, who again was like 4 when I started filming. Yeah, she's gonna be like 7 now. I guess Bryn took a video of her when she was asking if Hillary loved her anymore because I don't show up. I was like, oh no, like,
man,
of course I still love you. Of course I still love you. We can't be together right now because I can't really travel. But like, I can't wait to come out and see you again and watch the film.
Yeah. Wow. That's like an unintended consequence and byproduct of documentary filmmaking. When you're like embedded with people, it's like you're missed when you're gone. That's so heartbreaking. Oh my gosh. And also did you know, I feel like, you know, politics, maybe even, I mean, well, certainly more now than, you know, in 2016, 17, 18, when you were working on the film, but then too, like politics is a real hot potato, you know, and I feel like people like, you know, I mean, like I've gone to dinner with people where they're like, I just can't talk about politics, you know? So did you have folks who were like in their orbit, like either voters or people who would come to their events who were like, what's the deal with the camera? Like, what is this for? Did you have to kind of like gain that like immediate and temporary trust of those people, and like how did you do that?
I think unfortunately, I guess it was definitely that sort of fell along, well, not entirely, I was going to say it fell along partisan lines, but I think initially when I was starting the project, all I had to do was show up and say like, I'm making a film about women running for office, and like all the Democrats were like, oh my God,
welcome,
I love it, come here, like, of course. And then the Republicans are a little bit more wary, generally speaking, but there was also some like, I wouldn't say that was the case as much for Granville, which is like a very small town. And so when I show up with a camera, like people notice. And even over like a few years that I was filming, people would start to like recognize me because I would always shoot B-roll like right downtown and stuff. And so people would start coming up and being like, I've seen you coming out here for the last like year. Like, who are you? And so there's also definitely like a wariness, I would say, in smaller communities too. But yeah, I mean, there are some sort of gatherings and groups that really never kind of let me in or felt great about letting me in. But in most of those cases, it's like you do some amount of asking for forgiveness and not permission. Like if I'm following Julie to an event, like I'm following Julie to an event, and then we get there, we'll sort of sort out who's going to be okay with me filming them and who's not.
Right.
And you kind of go from there.
Yeah. That's so interesting because I feel like if I ever see someone filming, because I'm, you know, I'm a film programmer, I'm always like, oh, cool. But then I'm always like, wait a second, what's going on? So, you know, and then with the politics aspect, I can imagine that would be challenging. But like, you know, you get the footage and you got the footage, you know, even if it was sort of like a bear to get it, you know, so.
Yeah, I think too, I'll just say quickly, like, I think too, I am a very non-threatening individual, and I have like a fairly small camera package, and 95% of the shoots we're on was just me. So it's like me with, you know, a mounted microphone, and I've got my subject, whoever it is that day, like wearing a mic. But like I have a very small footprint, and that definitely meant that I was treated differently than if I'd gone in with 5 people, you know, 3 or 4 of whom could have been like big dudes or whatever. I was like, I'm just like a little kind of non-threatening lady, which is frustrating to be underestimated sometimes, but also I do think like allowed me access in certain scenarios where I'm like, this five big dudes with a big old camera and sound setup wouldn't have gotten through this door.
Yeah, the energy changes. Yeah, that's interesting. And then also thinking about like how your personal like feelings of the political process changed, because I feel like, and again, like we're having this conversation, 10 days before the presidential election. And, you know, it's so much about like these federal elections, these presidential elections are like, it's about the celebrity of the candidates, and it's about the infamy and the Twitter and the news cycle. And it's sort of like, what I love about your film is it sort of like brings it back down to that like local grassroots, like what it's all about, like the politic of politics, that it's really about like connecting with people and changing your community and all that. So what were some of the things, well, were you like jaded when you entered the field, you know, where you're just like, ugh, like politics are terrible? And so that's the first question. And the second question is like, regardless of that, what did you sort of learn, or like, what are the positive things you gained from observing the political process in this manner?
I mean, the whole process felt like such an education to me, because I'm someone who's been involved with politics in that, like, I voted, I've occasionally volunteered, but I've never like worked for a campaign. I've never run myself. So like, I wasn't that familiar with like the full boots on the ground kind of stuff. So there was just like so much I learned about that. I think my big takeaways were like, kind of what you said about the local level, like it's part of why I wanted to focus the stories in this way. But like, I definitely, every time I would go on the campaign trail with Bryn, let's say, who's running for township trustee, like a little tiny office, you know, and I would see her talking to people, and then people would be like, wait, what's a trustee? Like, do I have a trustee? And I'd be like, how could they not know this? Those idiots. And I would like get home and look at my ballot and be like, what's a water reclamation? And then I would be like, oh, I think that's probably really important. And it was deeply, like, it was a really good check on myself to be like, okay, like, this is how, if you really think that this is how important that these offices are, that you're going to drive like 6 hours to get to Granville and film this story, like, you should be paying more attention in your own Chicago community, Hillary.
Right.
So, I mean, that was a really felt like a healthy thing for me to, you know, kind of check. But I think also, like, I think you asked if I was sort of jaded at all or cynical. I mean, I think the beautiful thing about local politics is that, like, really 90% of people who get into it, like, you don't get paid very well. It's a very thankless job. So you really have to want to do the work. And so that's what I saw from like all of the women that I was filming, and just so many more candidates who are like, oh, I'm really doing this because I'm passionate about like fixing the potholes, or, you know, getting a park built in my neighborhood or whatever. It's like, you truly have to care about that work. And it's like such a reinvigorating thing to step into that and be like, oh, these are folks who are like really having conversations around just the local important issues. And there's less of the rest of the crap that kind of you get at the national level and up and everything else. But, and then I think the piece of that did make me still yet more cynical was like a reminder that politics is just inherently not fair. And it's like the candidate that works the hardest, that's some of the most qualified, still isn't necessarily the one that wins. Even on the local level, it's still like, you still have to have money, you still have to get your name out there, you still will fight against like partisan, you know, biases and all of that. And so that was sort of heartbreaking for me to feel kind of going on the ride with those three women and seeing like, I wanted all of them to win. I thought our government would be better served with all three of those women in office. And it was, it was frustrating and heartbreaking to watch and say like, you worked your butt off and you would do great service here, but you still don't get elected.
Wasn't your day. Yeah. That's so hard. Yeah. It's like, as much as you feel it and think it and want it, it's like, it's still the political still, that's it. There's still so much disappointment, like inherently in it. Yeah. Just thinking about presidential election and like gearing myself up for whatever, that it's like, that's the truth. Like, as much as people want something or feel that something's important, it doesn't always pan out that way. And then thinking also about we talked about this a little bit, like in how you were gaining their trust, and certainly you got close to their families and everything, but why was it important to you to show their family life? And I mean, some of it was, like you said, you talked to women about their kids and how they were waiting to run, and wanting to have women who did have families and children. But, I feel like we come away with a real full sense of these women. And so can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to make sure it wasn't just about their campaigns and their professional pursuits?
Yeah, I it's sort of a whole bunch of reasons at once, but I think partially it's like the filmmaking background that I come from. Partially it's my own personal interest of like always being interested in the person at the heart of a thing. But I also sort of felt like it was important in this story because I kind of think that the politicians are seen so sort of through this inhuman lens. Like we get their campaign mailer maybe, or you see a campaign commercial and it's shiny or it's flat. It's two-dimensional, And so it was like, if I want more folks to run, you have to think that the people who are running are human just like you. And if they can do it, you can too. It's like you have to see the humanity in the politicians around you in order to think that you can take that step. And so it was important to me to to see them all as full people. And I kind of warned them up front. I was like, this isn't going to be a campaign commercial. I'm not going to try, and this isn't me trying to slander you, but like, you're a full person with flaws, and you learn stuff and you mess up, and like, I'm going to put all of that out there. And they were all incredibly brave and trusting to really allow me access and to do that. But I think seeing their family and how they interact and what kind of support that they all get and what that takes, again, it's like really trying to put the unvarnished picture of running for office out there so that people can view it and say like, okay, that seems like I could swing it, or like, you know what, I see all of the pros and cons and maybe it's not for me. Like either way, it felt like the whole picture needed to be out there.
Mm-hmm. I even think of those mailers that you get, and it's like there's like a glossy picture of the candidate like laughing with their children, and it's like, so like that, it like they try but they fail because there's just no way to really capture someone completely. And so I think Represent does such a great job with showing those other parts of them.
Yeah, and which is why I'm so grateful that like Julie had me along the day that they're doing those kind of like family photos, and you see like her youngest son has been doing it for hours and is melting down, and everyone's like, I'm so tired of this and like just want to go home. And they still ended up, they still got the beautiful family photos that are up on their website. And it's not saying that those aren't true, but it's like, but yeah, this is all that goes into the making of that feels important to put out there.
Yeah, that's great. And then speaking about the independent filmmaking process, I think I read somewhere that obviously you were driving across the Midwest, and I think I read you said something like you drove the length of like the circumference of the planet or something. So and like you said, you had a small footprint. It was mostly just you. This is over the course of numerous years. Like independent cinema filmmaking doesn't usually have much money, so like. How are you doing? Have you recovered from all of that? Like, were there dark days where you were like behind the wheel and you were just like, I can't do this? Like, how was that process?
What an excellent question. I think I'm mostly recovered at this point. I've had some time this summer to like have my distance and like sit back a little bit. But yeah, it ended up, I went through 3 cars in the process of the making of this film. And yeah, I mean, partially it's like the travel does take a huge toll because it was 6 hours out to Ohio, 4.5 hours out to Detroit every time. And so it also means like, okay, you're staying out there for a few days, which I think meant for kind of better coverage because I was just there, And so it was like good for the story, bad for Hillary's like personal life and work-life balance. And they were definitely, God bless my supportive boyfriend who was at home, like both watching the cat and also like I would, I might get like 5 hours into a drive and then just be like, I'm about to fall asleep. So I need to like call someone, even though it's like midnight, and just talk while I'm driving, or I'm going to like drive off the road.
Right.
And so like, I also needed, all of the supportive family stuff I'm talking about, like in the film, it's like, I also needed that to make the film happen.
Yeah.
because
Well,
otherwise it's not.
I feel like your process of making the film really does mirror their campaign process, because it's like there's not a lot of money. You know, it's independent filmmaking. There may be fame, but nothing's promised. You know, you're doing it because you love the story. You're doing it because you care. So it's like, I imagine that when you showed up, like sort of beleaguered after like a 6-hour drive, like they were all like, "Hi, me too." You know what I mean? Like I feel this way too. Like we're all exhausted.
Yeah, for sure. Like way more than I was anticipating. There were like those mirrors. And I think like Maya and I in particular would talk about this a lot, because we were both like, I'm only a few years older than Maya is. And so we were both really like going out on a limb in a big way and like making an investment in ourselves that like not everyone around us understood or thought would pay off. And some of that was like literally like I went into credit card debt to buy my camera when Maya went into credit card debt to like fund some of her campaign. And we were like looking at each other and being like, well, if no one else is making the investment in us, maybe we have to, and maybe it will still pay off in the end. And it did. And we're both out of credit card debt. So that's the story. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like being an independent filmmaker is very similar to like running a scrappy campaign.
Yeah. And how many hours of footage did you capture?
It's around 300.
Wow. And the film's like 90 minutes ish. Yeah.
90 minutes. It started off as like 5 hours and then I had to shrink it down.
And you did all the editing? You're the editor on the film. Did you work with like a team at all? And
so I'll say like I was the primary editor, but I had an assistant editor, an additional editor, a consulting editor, who were all like so incredibly valuable to have those people when you're like deep in your head and you don't know what anyone else is getting from a scene anymore. Like you have to have those people around you, as well as just like an amazing producing team and like the folks at Gorton who co-produced the film with me that like you could sit down and do feedback screenings and help get me outside of my head. That's great.
So and it's such a Chicago, it feels like such a Chicago film because of like the Gorton family part of it. So and then so you had the film, you're editing the film, and then like 2020 happens, and like you had Represent was in film festivals, and those festivals changed, they canceled or went virtual, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how has that experience been for you as a filmmaker? I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly. Like, how has 2020 and releasing a film in 2020 been?
I mean, it's been hard. I think the piece that breaks my heart is that I still haven't been able to watch the film in a theater, and I haven't been able to watch it. Like I watched a cut of the film with each of the 3 women when we were in the process of finishing it, sort of towards the end of 2019, I guess. But we had tickets to go to our in-person festival premiere in March, and all 3 women were coming out with all their families, and we had a premiere party planned, and like it's just so hard, because I think that experience would be so game-changing for them too, to like not just see themselves on screen, but like hear the people around them kind of laughing and crying along with them. I think that goes a long way to sort of answering the question, like, why do this? Why let someone film your life for these 3 years? It's like, you have to have that closure at the end. And I'll just be selfish and say, like, as a filmmaker, you want that too. You desperately want to like have that moment where you're like, oh, that joke, I was right to leave it in. Everyone got it.
Well, and you want your like film festival lanyard. You know what I mean? Like,
for sure. I don't have nearly enough swag. That's the real tragedy of 2020. But I mean, so it's hard not to have that in-person thing where like you hear and you can see people's faces that it like they got it, they connected with the film and everything. So I do think we've still been really lucky to play in some film festivals, and we have a broadcast, our PBS broadcast coming up, and we had a virtual theatrical run. So like the film is getting out there. It's just like, but I can't see anyone seeing it. Like, it feels strange to experience all of that when it's like, but it's still just my living room, guys. Like,
I like what you said, that it's like the theatrical experience is the closure of the project. Like, I never really thought about it like that, but that is sort of that's the why and that's the what. And so to have that lacking, even though you found it in other ways, is really sort of strange. It's sort of like a phantom feeling.
Yeah.
You will watch it in a theater with people eventually. Like I'm keeping the faith, like for you and for all of us, that we'll be back to that soon.
Yes.
Okay, so my two final questions are, one was, there's so many political documentaries that are like, either like historically significant or, especially I feel like there's even more kind of coming out that are in response to the Trump administration and focusing on that aspect of sort of the election cycle. So just curious, like what political docs have you watched or did you watch in prep or while you were filming?
I tried to watch a whole lot, in part because it's like, it's great to be able to pull creative inspiration from moments, and in part because, as we were going through the process of fundraising and pitching and distributing the film, we're always going to get asked the question like, oh, well, how are you different? Or how, what are you doing to establish yourself, kind of thing. And so it's like, well, for research purposes also, like I need to just know what else is out there. So I try to watch pretty much everything contemporary coming out in this moment. And of course, looking back historically too, like I kind of keep saying, like, I feel like Represent in some ways is like Maya Jones's Street Fight, because she's the Cory Booker, she had that first tough loss. She's not famous yet, but like clearly she's going to go places. And I think people will come back to this film in 10 years, 20 years when Maya's president or whatever she's going to do. Be like, oh, this is where I can see like young Maya Jones when she's crappy. And, and so I think there are so many, honestly, both like political docs, and because I was trying to do so much sort of personal storytelling as well around these three women, like there are so many other types of docs as well that I was like, oh, I want to pull from this to help us with this character arc or whatever. But there are some great films that have come out recently about women running for office in particular. Like I love Knock Down the House, and and I just was able to see the series And She Could Be Next, and that one's great too. And like I'm proud to be like a part of that pantheon. But I still also think like Represent has its own like little particular niche.
Yeah,
I tried to do.
Yeah. Well, and I also, again, like, I love that it's this like grassroots, like, it just really, really feels local and familiar. You know what I mean? It feels like we know these people in a really interesting way. So that's great. So, okay. So I said I was going to have two questions, but I'm adding one before I ask you my last question. So what are you working on now? Are you working on anything now?
I've been doing a little bit of editing for some other projects. So I just edited a short doc that came out on The Intercept that is also about two really rad community organizers who are like getting out the vote in Milwaukee. It's very on brand for me. And then otherwise, I have my sort of Google Doc of ideas that I've been building for like the 3 years that I've been working on Represent. And when it got time to be wrapping up this project, I was like, this doesn't feel like a good moment to like dive into something else, really, for like safety's sake. And like, I know a lot of people who are shooting and trying to do it as safely as possible. But I'm just like, I don't know how I would sort of do that process of like building trust with people when you're like, well, I don't know if I can go into your house right now. And like, I can't take off this mask. And like, it's a hard moment to think about starting a new story. So I'm trying to see where I can plug into other projects that are already in process and kind of keep a couple of my grand plans on the back burner, maybe until next year.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like how I feel like as a person in this planet and in this country, like changes every like 90 minutes. I'm like, now I care about this, and like, I can't believe this. So it's like, maybe the like dust needs to settle, like that may be a while, and how you define the dust is, varied, but I think that's, that sort of like letting the inertia slow down and like thinking about the future is what a lot of people are doing. So, So my last question is, where will you be on election night 2020?
So I was supposed to be an election coordinator. I'd signed up and I took a class, but then I did some traveling and now I'm under quarantine. So now I cannot do that. So very recently I was like, oh crap, I don't know what I'm doing on election night. I like set up a date to maybe like go for a walk in the woods with a friend. So I was like, that seems like it will be necessary. Since I'm voting later today, I don't need to do that. But I truly, I think we probably won't know the results for a while. And so I'm like, I will for sure be glued to my TV screen, but I also am trying to figure out ways like what can I do to like feel okay if we don't find out that night, and
Right.
this gets stretched out for weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm accepting like anyone's good ideas for how to stay sane through election night.
Yeah, what to do, what, like, pick up a new hobby. Just start
What are
knitting
you
that
doing?
night. I don't know either, because normally I gather a group of people and we go to like the local bar and like, have dinner and like have some drinks, and, the evening energy certainly changes at some point. And we can't do that this year,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't know. There was part of me that the same sort of like go walk in the woods thing, like I was like, maybe I should just turn off my computer, put it in the closet, like, deep clean the bathroom, go for a long walk, like commune with nature. But I don't know. I don't think I have that willpower. I think I would be glued to my TV as well. So, and I'm voting day of, which we talked about before we started recording. So I will get that out of my system, and then maybe, go primal scream somewhere. I'm not sure. Well,
The padded rooms that we all need.
yes, exactly. I'll make my padded room on the day. I'll finish it by midnight, and
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, Hillary, thank you so much for your film and for joining me, and congratulations on Represent. I think, again, it's representative, and it's really a lovely portrait of the political process and also the passion of the women that you've documented. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for screening it. I'm so glad. Yeah. So glad
Absolutely. And Represent is now playing virtually at gortoncenter.org/film. And I recommend you watch it before or after you vote. Thanks so much.